Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today, I'm really excited to have Glen Phillips here. Glen Phillips is the lead singer for Toad the Wet Sprocket and also a solo artist. And he's going to be here to hang out with us, talk to us about his, how he got started and how this all came together. And might play a couple songs for us. So we're really excited to have Glen on the show today. So stay tuned for that. If you've got questions, make sure to throw those into Makana. Of course, it's really important to vote on those questions. Move those questions up. If you see questions that you like, go ahead and vote those up. We've got a lot of great votes today. But throw those questions in. If you are not able to do that, you can, of course, use askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global, and you can ask your questions there. Those will go into a QR code, and that will go into a little system, and then we'll move them into the show. You can use that all day, every day. Askofficehours.global. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Bill, what do we have?
Our first one comes from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Orlando, Florida. And I guess it's for me. It says, Bill, when you're recording audiobooks, do you ever work with a director, or are you directing your own recordings?
Go ahead, Bill.
It has changed a bit over the years. So let me talk about originally. I did a ton of that. In fact, one of the reasons I got into broadcast and radio and voice work was because I volunteered when I was very young in my career with a group that was then called Recording for the Blind. And we used to do textbooks. In that circumstance, I always had somebody outside the booth directing, looking for mistakes. So it was a team effort, never solo. Now you're going to flash forward to the modern era. And the biggest audiobook system is ACX, which is owned by Audible through Amazon. And they produce, I think, more audiobooks than anyone else. And they have migrated us all into a system where you pretty much work by yourself. You can do that. Some people still have producers, and some of the books for best-selling authors at the top end still have directors and producers and a team that works behind them. But most of the work is now done solo, which means you are producing yourself. It is an interesting split of your brain to try to figure out how to do the work and to watch that you're doing it correctly while still performing the work. It reminds me a little of Hollywood actors who go into directing and say one of the toughest things to do is direct myself in a movie. And I think it is difficult, but I find it a fascinating process. So these days, most of it is one person in those kind of systems responsible for creating and finishing the book all by themselves.
How long does it take you to do a book?
It can depend. An average book is somewhere around 10 hours, and I've heard people say 5 to 1, 6 to 1, sometimes even 10 to 1 in terms of 9 hours behind the scenes for every hour that ends up on tape, or 4 or 5 if you're really experienced. So 40, 50, 60 hours. The thing is, you can't really sustain an 8-hour day of performance like that. You just shred your voice if you do that. So you have to work in maybe 1, 2, 3, some really good experienced and really conditioned narrators will do 4-hour stretches or something like that. But it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
How many books do you do a year?
Others do more. I'm at this point somewhere right around 10. I think I have the capacity for 10. And as a matter of fact, right now, I have 3 books going concurrently, and I was shocked at how much pre-work it takes and how I had to literally chart out, because all of them are on various deadlines. So you have to be wary of getting too far behind. So between actually tracking the text, going back, cleaning up mistakes, editing, there's a system called Punch and Roll that some people are very good at this too, where they just back up every time they make a mistake. But I'm not quite good enough to be super efficient at that system yet. So I have to record and then go back and make sure everything's clean. And then there's a lot of mastering on the back end that you have to do too. So it takes a good little bit of time. It's not a simple thing, but I got to tell you, it's fun.
Yeah, it would be the one way to get me to read more is just read other books out loud. So you got to make it a job, and then you're off to the races.
You do, but it's so much fun. I mean, you get to work with a creative person who has put their heart and soul into crafting a story. And yeah, there's a wide variety of content, but if you get something that really resonates with you, it is so much fun to work hard to kind of bring it to life figure out where the characters are supposed to be. Yeah.
Do you work with the authors?
Yeah, in fact, more and more. Authors are different too. Sometimes they've already put their 3 years or whatever it took them to write the book and get it published and get it out there. And some of them think, okay, I must have an audiobook because that's now a bigger and expanding market. So I want to explore this, but they don't really want to be involved in the process. Other authors absolutely love collaborating with you, and I've had both experiences, and I like it most when I have an author that I really kind of become friends with, and we talk about it, and we work together. And one of the most interesting things is there are some things that are great when written for the eye, but are not very good for the ear, so you have to adapt. And having an author allow you, okay, let's work together on making this come alive for the listener, because that's different than the reader.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more important. You know, I almost only buy audiobooks if it's all text. If I see something that's all text, I'm like, this is an audiobook. Like, this is not, like, if it has lots of pictures in it, then I'm like, this is a book that I should buy. Usually, like, 80% of them are Kindles, and then every once in a while I'll buy a real book, mostly because it's not available on Kindle and I really want it. But I prefer, what I like about audiobooks is I can buy lots of audiobooks and they can sit on my phone and not be listened to, as opposed to filling up a whole wall of books that I bought and didn't read. So anyway, like only skip through and look at a couple sections. Anyway, next question.
Next question comes to us from John Green, in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. I'm a photographer using a Sony A1 camera. When shooting video, does the shutter speed matter? Any suggestions for best results appreciated?
Courtney?
Well, it depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting sports, you want a faster shutter speed. If you want something that looks normal, you use a 180-degree shutter, or sometimes it depends on the frame rate that you're shooting at. 180-degree shutter. The degrees in mentioning shutter speed comes from the old film, which used a rotating shutter, which was a blade that obscured the frame while the film was being pulled down to the next frame and then opened up for the exposure time. And a 180-degree shutter means that it was half and half, so that rotating half of a circle. So as it rotated around, it would be half of the time of the frame rate. So if you're shooting 24 frames per second, it would be a 48th of a second. Would be the exposure time. And so they've carried that forward into digital cameras and electronic cameras. They don't have rotating shutters anymore. Most of them don't. But they're electronic shutters, and they sample during that shutter speed time, and then they shut off the sample so that they're not gathering light onto the sensor during the time that it was technically dark. They just shut off and transfer the signal from the imager to memory at that point in time. So the faster the shutter speed, the more precise and less image blur there is in your image. So you'll see that staccato type movement. You'll see stuttering sometimes. If you slow it down, it'll be less smooth with a faster shutter speed as opposed to a slower shutter speed, or a lower shutter angle gives you a faster shutter speed. A higher shutter angle, like 360 degrees is the maximum, gives you a much longer exposure time. So a lot of cameras use this method of controlling exposure as opposed to iris, which is in the lens, which opens and closes the amount of light that passes through the lens. Some of the automatic exposure times use varying the shutter speed to vary the exposure time. So you got to be careful about that, because it may be doing that automatically if you're not set in manual.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, all of what Courtney said, he covered a lot of it. From the aesthetic point of view, when you're learning to shoot either still photography or video, you're kind of constantly working with this ratio of things. There is the shutter speed, how long the light is allowed through the camera. There's the aperture, which is how wide is the opening that is letting light through. And typically today in most of our video cameras, there's also ISO, which is gain applied to the signal. So you're always trying to balance those three things. When you say, does shutter speed matter? Yes, because it's one of the primary spokes of that three-part exposure idea. And just as Courtney said, if you get too high a shutter speed, it starts affecting the visual look of the footage that's coming out. It can get, I kind of consider it more brittle looking. I know that's kind of a fluffy term, but it's the aesthetic that you're looking for. So if you control your shutter speed first and decide exactly that how much time do you need the lens open? Then you can drop back and control your lighting to work on exposure and still keep your ISO not pumped up so high that you get the ISO effects of too much gain.
Yeah, and usually, so what we're used to at the 180 degree rule, what we're used to is your shutter speed being twice your frame rate. So that's what you're kind of used to seeing in the world. When you watch a movie, it's 24 frames a second, and the shutter speed is 1/48th. When you're watching TV, it might be 30 frames a second with a shutter speed of 100 or 1/60th of a second. And so that's 180. When you see the shutter speed be twice your frame rate, that's what you're there. As that shutter speed goes away from the frame rate, as it keeps on getting higher than the frame, or shorter than the frame rate in time, so it becomes 1/120th or 1/240th of a 30 frame per second, it's going to look very framey because you don't see any motion blur that's connecting those two things anymore. And so that's going to reduce that because you don't have less and less motion blur because it's just opening very quickly. So that's the challenge that you have, because what's happening is it's exposing the frame, but it's only pulling it in. It's only pulling the light in very quickly and into that area. Now, the challenge there. Now, the other thing you can go is the other direction, of course, is you can open up that shutter, so it'll feel a little more dreamy if you start getting closer to a 360-degree shutter. Now, you can do crazy things with cameras, but 360 is generally your outer edge there. One thing that you start to get challenged. So typically, what people are going to expect is if you're shooting 30 frames a second, you're going to do it a 1/60th. If you're shooting 60 frames a second, you're going to do a 1/120th. That's what 24. You're going to be 1/48. That's what people are going to expect to see when they see your footage. And so that's what you want to think about. And you definitely want to lock that down. As you start to look for short depth of field, you may want to open up your aperture, and those shutter speeds that you're using for video is much lower than what you use in still. And so when you go outside, you're going to have a problem with exposure. And so what you need to think about there is ND filters. So adding ND filters are going to lower the amount of light coming into the camera so that you can open your aperture, and then you can also keep your shutter speed where you need it to be to make that actually work. So those are some things to consider as you work on it, but you definitely have to pay attention to it. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is up next. Do you use short or broad light for interview subjects, and why?
Courtney?
I think broad light makes the interview subject look a lot better. A nice broad area of light so that there's less shadows, it's less harsh, it's less dramatic, but it's more pleasing to the eye, especially women like it because it shows less wrinkles. You may want to limit it with an egg crate on a broad light, which will prevent it from spilling off onto the background, so that you want to light your subjects only, and maybe you want to keep your background darker. So if you're using a broad light overhead in front of your subject, you want to keep it from spilling on the back. You can either flag it off, or you can use a crate, which has the little squares, looks like an egg crate, that you put in front of the light. Is it called a grid sometimes? That will keep the light, it'll keep it broad and spaced out, but it will keep it from spilling onto the background and other areas of the set that you don't want.
Good, Bill?
Yeah, I think Courtney got most of the major parts. Again, for me, it's an aesthetic choice. You're trying to say, what is the story I'm telling here? If you are shooting a person who of a certain age and you want to flatter them as much as possible, broad light does exactly what Courtney's saying, because the light is large relative to the face of the person you're saying. That light coming in from various angles softens wrinkles and things like that. Now, on the other hand, if I was shooting, for example, a cowboy who had spent their life out in the outdoors, making them look too unwrinkled, maybe against the idea of, look, this guy's really been there and done that. So I've seen both still photo portraits and video where you're not trying to make them look better than they are, because what they really are says volumes about the life they've lived and what they've accomplished. So hopefully a good cinematographer, good director is always trying to figure out what's the right lighting for telling the right story under these circumstances and keeping everything real or not so real as you choose.
Nothing's real that we actually capture. We always have to remember that. I think that one of the things, sorry, I was just trying to get this set up here. In general, for interviews, the rule of thumb is large. We have, even when we're shooting models, that have nothing, that we try to get really, really large sources. Here's an example of a setup that we had a little while ago. So you can see those are the egg crates that Courtney was talking about there. But very large sources, and oftentimes as close to the subject as possible, so that we can get. And a lot of times there's bounces and everything else. But as the size of that source gets closer to you and large, the other thing is, remember, is that if you have a really large source and you move it further away, it's a really small source in the relationship to the person. So as we have that large source get closer and closer to the subject, it is, as everyone said, filling in everything and filling in all the imperfections and creating kind of a smoother experience. Sometimes people want something that's hard and edgy. So it depends on what you're looking for. But if you're doing general interviews of experts or general interviews for a documentary or whatever, generally you want it to be something that makes everybody look good. And if you want them to look good, you're going to use large sources. Next question.
Brody Brazil in Danville, California is up next, and Brody says, recently got the Rode Streamer X, but having some issues with levels. In Unity software, all virtual channels monitor much lower than they send to the stream mix in OBS. Mic and sound pads from hardware mix just fine. Everything is in the detent. Ideas?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so Brody, I think you mean the Unify Rode app, which I've got here in front of me. Now, I haven't had time to play with this, so I'm not sure I have enough information to properly answer your question, but I'm curious, when you say monitoring, is it that the levels, I'm guessing the levels you're seeing on the meters coming back through that app are probably lower than what you're actually sending. That's what it sounds like you're saying. I don't really have an explanation for that because I haven't really dug into it, but it sounds like that's what you're saying. But I think we need a little more information to try to troubleshoot this, and I'm happy to work through that with you because I haven't played with that device.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I'm also kind of I do know that I have a Rodecaster Pro, which everything is running to, which is the much bigger brother to the Rodecaster X, Streamer X. But at least on the Rodecaster Pro, I know there is a separate mix matrix for the headphones, so that you can control the level of the inputs that are feeding into the headphones. So if you can find that in either the software, because you don't have an LCD on the Streamer X, in the software, there might be a separate mix matrix for your headphones so that you can do mix minuses that allows you to take one of your inputs and bring it down completely in the headphones so that people don't hear themselves, or bring it up so you can hear yourself locally, bring it down so it's not feeding the person coming in back out to them. So look into them if there's a separate headphone mix in that software, and make sure the levels are set evenly that you want to hear in the head. Adjust your levels in the headphones so that they match what you're sending out over the stream.
And Mickey says, if you're using a PC, make sure that allow applications to take exclusive control of this device is disabled, and disable communications ducking on it as well. Next question.
Chris Widener in Indianapolis, Indiana says, LTO drives, what is the current best value? LTO 7? I need more long-term space, but really debating on the value proposition of larger tape.
Go ahead, Nigel.
So tape storage, everyone thought this would have been gone 10 years ago, but actually it's going to double between 2020.
Every time I see LTO, I'm like, really? There are people still using LTO?
I have to tell you, by 2030, it'll be a $10 billion business growing about 8% a year. So tape is really split into really two markets now. A very high-end mainframe, things like this, that IBM produced with the 3485s and 95s, and this is a competitive one that I launched years ago for somebody else, and tape libraries and silos and things like that, and that still remains a very active market. People don't buy as many silos as they used to, but they buy a lot of tapes, and if you are doing very long-term storage of data that does not need instant response, so if 20 seconds, 30 seconds is enough to find a file, that's still commercially the best way for very long-term storage. It's very stable, it's very cheap, and very effective. Now, LTO was a sort of a more open source version of that. Generally, it comes from 2 or 3 manufacturers. It's 2 or 3 make the head, and then the rest wind them into bodies. LTO 9, I think, is going to be available. With an LTO, you really have to ask 2 questions. Is it the amount or is it the speed? And there are often different tapes of length when you want fast access or you want long access. So when should you use tape? The answer for tape is if you need off-site, if you need storage that really doesn't require you getting the answer back fairly instantaneously, and you're willing to do it and have it long-term, then it still remains a very viable thing. But it's really now a high-end commercial, long-term legal thing. If you're worried about being sued, if you're worried about having to go back 10 years and get all the records and recreate them, great use of tape.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I had a couple of LTO systems over the course of my years when I was doing a lot of corporate work and just had to back things up, and I was never happy with any of them. And the sad thing is that some of the DC 2000 type tapes and things like that, the 3M manufactured at the time, it's virtually impossible to find anything to play them back now. At the level Nigel's talking about, which is corporate, bank repositories and things like that, absolutely, still going strong. But every time they changed the format over the course of those years I was using LTO, I just kind of had the immediate feeling this is all going to be unreadable in another 10 years. And sure enough, if I had to go out and find something to play one of those old DC 2000 tapes, I'm not sure I could even do that.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, many have discussed the reduced memory bandwidth of the M3 Pro, 150 gigabyte per second, versus the M3 Max, 200 gigabytes a second. What production tasks might be bottlenecked by said reduced bandwidth?
Good, Nigel.
I'm going to let somebody else talk to the production different jobs because they probably know better than me. I just want to make a point. Some of this is just pure technology nonsense. You got to remember, we just talked about LTO. There's a hierarchy of storage, and there's on-chip, and there's cache, and there's hard, and there's, off-machine stuff. The reality is the only way to really know what the performance is to run the application that you're running with the sort of data that you're going to run through it and see what the performance is. There's a question of bandwidth, there's a question of latency, there's a question of application. We always used to joke that all processors do the same thing at the same speed, which is wait for data. So there may be applications that require vast bandwidth, but you've really got to look at the balanced design of the system, find the application you want to run, and then look for real world usage cases. Don't get too concerned by the gossip and the rumors.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, I agree with Nigel 100%. It depends on what you're doing. If you have a high volume shop and you are running work orders through all day long, every day, then spending as much money as you can for as much efficiency, even in these small kind of what incremental differences it seems like, is sometimes a really good use of money because, 20 minutes between now and getting the project out the door versus 8 minutes between now and getting the project out the door might make a difference in your circumstance. For most of us, it really doesn't. Now, I tend to try to find the middle place. So an M3 Max as opposed to an M3 Ultra, if that comes out, may not pay for me because I'm not in that circumstance where I can't wait an extra half an hour typically to get the work out the door. But I do know that every time I've spent money for more speed and more capacity, particularly in my main daily driver machine, I felt really good about it because it lasts longer, it does work more efficiently, and it just makes my life easier. And to me, that's worth spending money to achieve.
Go ahead, Alex.
So with x86 infrastructure, I found that, there was very little difference between one speed of RAM and another piece of RAM. But it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated with Apple Silicon stuff because everything's on everything's on die on a system on package, right? So the memory bandwidth matters a lot more because the GPU and the CPU and everything's integrated there. Now, again, like everybody said, of course, the only way to really know is to run those benchmarks. And some companies do publish benchmarks with their own applications so you can see, it's obviously to brag too about how well optimized their code is. But I would maybe check with whatever pro applications you're using to see if the manufacturers have done any actual testing and see if they've actually posted that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. It really depends on the load. Anything computationally expensive, like encoding video, probably graphics, I imagine a lot more like 3D graphics would matter. So if it's your job and you're getting paid to do something and that matters, it's probably going to be worthwhile getting the faster chip.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, of all the bottlenecks that are in your PC there, the memory bottleneck's probably the last one you're going to hit because, disk I/O or storage I/O is a lot slower. Where you might run into a difference between 150 and 200 if you're trying to, record or play back, 8K video, real time, HD uncompressed. That may run into the memory bandwidth bottleneck because it uses that same RAM, that on-die RAM for graphics memory as well as the system memory. So you may run into problems, graphics issues, if you're trying to do super high resolution video in and out. That may be you may see a difference between 150 and 200, but that's probably the last barrier you're going to get to is the memory bandwidth up there. All the other barriers are going to stop you usually before you get to that barrier.
Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Is anyone experimenting with the Stream Deck Plus? What results are you having? Is it worth using?
Nigel?
So I have practically one of every one of these things. I have like the 64 and the 32 and the 16 and the 6 or whatever, the 8, whatever it is. And the one that never gets used is the Stream Deck Plus. So there are two issues with it. For me, it does get used, but there are two issues with it. One is there's only 8 keys on it, and although there are, the panel above the dials is touch sensitive, it really only has 8, and so too much page changing is difficult to do. The second thing is I found relatively little use for the dials. There really just aren't that many supported applications that are important to me that work it. I love the other two. I have one of them set up using the Stream Deck software on the machine I use to send out my Zoom and my Teams and stuff. And it manages my day-to-day applications. One button gets my office hours going. It's just the fastest way. My other one, which is the 64-bit, I actually run Companion, and that runs my production system. And I keep them separate. I don't like integrating the two. But the one I really struggle to find use for is the Plus.
Next question.
Scott Pulsifer in Philadelphia. Which audio interface do you recommend to improve a new user's audio-video feed to us? Easy over good is his priority. Focusrite, Motu, Mixpre, other?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, these days, any class-compliant interface that doesn't require special software, drivers, mixer application, all that sort of stuff, they're going to be very easy to use. And I've got, for example, this Universal Audio Volt interface here. I mean, you got a mic preamp, you plug it in, you've got a gain pot, you turn it up to the right level, and that's basically it. You got headphone monitoring, plus a separate volume pot for your powered speakers that you've got plugged into the back. So they're all pretty good. The Volt 1 or the Universal Audio Volt series are pretty good quality, I find. And then, of course, you've got other options too, like the Motu series. These new Motu M2 interfaces I find are quite nice. Plus, you get these nice meters for both the input and the outputs on it as well. These ones are good. They got 60 dB of gain on the preamps. They're pretty good. And if you have a little bit deeper pockets here, the Lewitt Connect 6 gives you 2 mic preamps. I know it's got a really strange design here. It looks like a spaceship. But you get onboard DSP processing too. So you get compression, you get parametric equalizer, and you get a downward expander on every channel. Plus the mixer application is really cool on this, and you can create custom mix minuses. You can create special headphone mixes. It's got 2 headphone outputs, so each musician or each person that you've got, you could do a 2-person podcast. They can each have their own headphone mix, and it works on a mobile device as well. You've got USB-C ports there, so something like that. The other thing too with the Lewitt is that it has USB delay. Now, a lot of interfaces, because they're geared towards only music production, like the Volt, like the Focusrite interfaces, they don't have any USB delay. So if you're going to use this in a setup with video, it's kind of nice to be able to delay your audio, because invariably, oftentimes we find the audio arrives a lot faster than the video. So that's something to think about too.
Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida is up next. What's a teaser in lighting, and how is it used?
Courtney?
That's when a secondary lighting director comes in and goes, that's not the way to light this person. I can do it much better than that. Actually, a teaser is, in my interpretation, is usually a strip or a border of black cloth that is used to either keep a light in the background from hitting the lens, or to keep the light from the foreground of hitting the background. You bring it down so that you can create a line or an area below which the light, above which the light doesn't go. So a teaser is used frequently to get boom shadows out of the shot, get them off the wall in the background. So you'll bring a teaser in that'll make a nice line cut that looks fairly natural across the back of the wall to get the unwanted shadows of overhead things off the back, or it can prevent backlights from shining into the lens and creating flares.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, 100% that. Normally it's that curtain, particularly behind a proscenium or something like that, that makes sure that the audience can't see. There's one other use I've seen, which is something to hide something else on stage. So if you have an instrument, a practical on stage, I've heard directors say, bring in a teaser to put in front of that, so some sort of a prop or a curtain or something to mask the audience from being able to see that thing that you don't want them to see because it breaks the illusion on stage. So something that masks something else is kind of the overall idea of a teaser.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Indianapolis, Indiana. Tell me I'm not the only one to get frustrated enough about the ATEM's need to reboot that I added an IP PDU so I could power cycle without touching the cord.
I haven't gotten to that point. I think I do just enough on my system. I do see it every once in a while. What Chris is talking about is that we get this occasional gray screen that appears if we've requested the ATEM too often. It will show us a gray screen, and the way to fix that is to reboot the system. And the key is, by the way, is save start state save start state before you jump into the next thing. But that's the easiest way to make that happen. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I just put a inline toggle switch into mine so that it does lights that light up my mixer that are underneath it, and it turns on and off the power, so I don't ever have to touch the cords. I don't have to plug it or unplug it, especially that screw in power cable in the ATEMs. It's kind of a pain to unscrew that and unplug it and plug it back in since it doesn't have a switch. So I have an inline toggle switch. I just go, and it comes back.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so I rarely ever have to reboot it. So you will probably find if you don't use the USB UVC webcam output that it would be a lot more reliable, like the dreaded ATEM gray screen that a lot of people experience here. Another thing you can do other than just putting an inline power switch, what I found, which was a very inexpensive solution, is I went to IKEA, and for $15 I got one of these little power switches here. You just plug your ATEM into that, and then it's got a little infrared remote switch, and I've got one of these here, so if there's a catastrophe I can just remotely turn it off and on, and that seems to work for me.
Nigel?
I have a bunch of my stuff on power strips with to make sure the energy is clean, to make sure there are breakers on it, and I turn it off every morning and I turn it back on again.
And you never have a problem.
Yeah, I never have a problem. But what I will tell you is strange to me. I have a pre-assigned IP address to it, and sometimes it just doesn't like that. So there's something else that sneaks in. But every day I turn it on and off.
Courtney?
Yeah, Alex, I think you figured out what causes the ATEM gray issue, but it doesn't necessarily turning it on every day. I turn mine on every day. It's off all night, and I turn it on right before the show. A lot of times in the pre-show, it'll be delivering ATEM gray right out of the box right after being turned on. So it's not necessarily a length of time until it does that. It's
at least on a Mac,
else.
it appears to be a certain number of instances. I've never seen it happen after I've restarted it.
Number of instances of what?
Of how many times something is requested that ATEM. So it's never been the first time it comes up. It appears like we haven't figured out exactly what the number is. I'm always thinking it's something like 32 or 64 or something because there's some bit there that's not going over it. But there's some number of times that whether it's Hangouts or Meet or Teams or anything that's asking for the switcher, there's a certain number of times they ask for the switcher and the switcher goes gray. That's our working theory, is that for some reason it gets over some bit and it goes gray. So so we're not. But I haven't seen it on Mickey said he's seen it also on an initial boot, and I've never seen that in
Yeah,
the
it's happened
4
to me
years
just
that I've
last
used it.
week on initial.
There you go. I don't know. I'd be curious to see if those initial grays have been on Macs or PCs, just to know whether they're operating differently. Next question.
Brian Enright in New York City. How do I get the full computer version of Makana? I've always end up with the mobile version on my desktop.
All you have to do is just make sure you get the right link. There's a light and a full link in the email that goes out every morning. So if you're getting that email, you just click on the full version and then make sure to pull your window open. If you pull your window in and make it thin, the full version will turn into the mobile version like magic. So that if you grab the mobile version or light version and you open it up, it'll just get wider. But if you grab the full version and squeeze it in, it'll turn into something that looks a lot like the mobile version. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, in a small 500-seat theater that mostly hosts music and spoken word acts, what PTZ cameras would you recommend that have 4K and low light performance?
In general, it depends on where you're putting them. If you're putting them in the back of the room, I probably lean towards the Panasonic, the 150s, or I think the 170s now. I think are the new ones. I'm not certain, but the Panasonics or the Sony BRC 1000s, I think, are the 1-inch chips there, or the Canon 500 series. So those are all kind of more industrial. They're going to have a 20x lens that's going to be able to zoom in from there. Now these are, I'm assuming you're talking about cost effective, because what like the Opera does is they put heavy cameras onto telemetrics heads or other kinds of heads like that and put them back there. So they're full broadcast cameras. They're just on a head that can handle them. So it depends on what the budget is of what you're putting out there. If you don't care about what the audience sees or doesn't see, and you put the cameras where they belong, so that the online audience has the best experience, then I would think about things like the FR7 that's going to pull it all in and allow you to have a great looking show. But it just depends on that. But yeah, as Richard Lavery says, he's got a lot of these. Is that the PTZs don't do well with low light. The FR7s do, because that's the same FX6 sensor, but you are going to have shorter depth of field, and it's a little more expensive, and you will need to move them in. Yeah, I wouldn't try to use an FR7 more than about 25 feet. So you really have to put them right at the stage, and that may not work for the rest of your audience. Go ahead, Alex.
You hit it there with the FR7 without knowing the budget, because I was just going to say a lot of these cameras have smaller sensors, so it's a challenge with low light.
Yeah, I mean that's the hard part with the smaller sensors. FR7 has great low light. Again, most of the PTZ work that I've done, we had BRC 900s, which were not as good as the BRC 1000s. We did move to those at one point, and we also had Panasonic 120s, which were before the 150s, and they all worked okay. Again, low light was not their specialty. The FR7 really made a big difference there, but you are dealing with a shorter depth of field that you have to kind of wrestle with. Next question.
Next one comes to us through our QR code, and it's from Scott Pulsifer again in Philadelphia. What switch or encoder do you recommend to improve a new user's audio-video feed to us? Easy over good is his priority. ATEM, Atmos, Connect, YOLO, software, other?
Alex?
Yeah, so as far as easy is concerned, I would definitely not suggest an ATEM, just because, look, I love my ATEMs, but there's just too many buttons. It's complicated for a lot of people. I would look at something, now without knowing the exact needs and requirements of your inputs and outputs, I would look at something like and we were talking about it earlier in the show today, the Rode Streamer X has a single HDMI input that will take 4K. And it has a balanced XLR mic level input plus onboard processing. And it is, just look at it, there's not that many buttons. The buttons have a nice large surface area. You can mute your mic. You can turn off your camera if you want to. You can trigger sounds, that sort of stuff. So something like this Rode X or the Roland UVC02, which a lot of people have. I also have one of those. Those are pretty easy to operate.
Good, Nigel.
Yes, he just took the words right out of my mouth. There's the Roland there. I would tell you, if what you're trying to do is to get somebody like an executive up level to a better broadcast, I'd really look at the whole Elgato infrastructure, particularly with the prompter and their camera and the stream deck and some lights. Again, if you really want, it's about $1,000. You could put together a really neat system that an executive could use day to day, would really be no different than just dragging and dropping another screen, a window to another screen. And that's probably, I think, the sneakiest way in for most people. The moment you get to these, you are into certain amount of tuning of features, what all these buttons do, and things can go wrong.
Quick reminder, of course, that you can ask questions throughout the hour if you'd like to. You can, of course, go into Makana and make sure to vote on those questions. We rarely get to the bottom of the questions in the first hour, so make sure to vote on the questions that matter to you the most so that we know which ones to answer. You can also ask questions via the QR code. That is askofficehours.global. That askofficehours.global. You can ask those 7/24. That's 24/7, whatever we want to say there. So you can ask them any time of the day, and they will feed into the show over time. That last one was from the QR code. Next question.
Brian Carney in Wheaton, Illinois is up next. This is yet another QR code question. Looking for resources for learning the base concepts for 3D animation, specifically how best to use the Z-axis for camera movement. Need an actual class or online resource?
If you can, there's a lot of videos out there. There's a lot of Blender videos, especially if you're looking for an inexpensive 3D software. But I would also look at, it depends on what you're trying to do. How much 3D do you really need? Or are you just doing Z-axis moving through things? And what does Z-axis mean? Because in different 3D packages, it could be up or it could be going towards you. If you're just doing some 3D movement, really think about things like Ripple Training has some motion training on how to use the 3D environment. Mark Spencer put it together, and it's great as far as just basically understanding 3D concepts in Apple's Motion. But probably the best training and community out there to teach people how to do this at a relatively low cost is Cineversity from Maxon. So Maxon's 3D, they do training it feels like every day. They've got tons of content out there that they're using to support their community, and it's relatively inexpensive. If you're a student, it costs like $10 a year to get Cinema 4D and all the training. So think about that there. There's also some great, Gray Gorilla has some great training on 3D, mostly around Cinema 4D, and School of Motion has a lot of great training around animation in general. In fact, Ryan Summers from School of Motion is going to be here on Wednesday. So think about those things as well. Next question.
Next one comes from our old friend Hasmuk Gajar in Cape Town, South Africa. Here's his question. In production, the talent is looking at the prompter and we show the grid view, the slide view, or the video ISO view. So far, they have not seen the program view. Talents ask, are they seeing the slide? Is it a good or bad idea to show the talent program view?
Go ahead, Bill.
I think this depends entirely on the talent, how experienced they are being talent, whether or not they understand the production flow. And the reason I say that is that if it's an amateur talent who does not peer very much and you put in a program view, and if it has anything confusing in it, delays or something else, it can really add extra load to a talent so that they get really confused and they kind of go in themselves and they don't perform well. Other talent who are used to being on screen benefit tremendously from an idea of what's going out and being able to see the picture. But to me, it's just test and see whether this talent or this panel or this group of people can handle the extra load of being the talent while also seeing the show going out. Some people can, some people it has a really bad effect on in my experience.
Yeah, I'd ask them what they want and have them see it and see if they like that or not. I do think as talent, I like to see program because I like to know when I'm on and what's being shown and so on and so forth. But I do think it can be a distraction for folks, especially if it can be more of a distraction if you're not showing the slides as fast as they expect you to. Then it's a real distraction for them because what's going on in their head is like, why aren't they showing the slide? So if you start showing them the program, you have to be really, or it really becomes a distraction because they feel like they're now reacting to that. If you can get them to trust you and not think about it, that's fine. But they'll just kind of they will get into a zone of that. But I think that especially when they're used to doing it all by themselves, there's going to be this little trust issue of not knowing. But if you start showing them, you got to make sure that your person is is immediately jumping to it to show them that it's there. Otherwise, it's gonna create an internal upset for them, and it'll affect their performance. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, it's most stuff been covered. It can be distracting. You want to ask the talent if they want to see themselves, because sometimes people will become obsessed with seeing themselves, and they're going, "Oh, do I really look that bad?" And so you may want to just keep the slide input up there so that they see that. If there's any kind of latency, or it can be a problem if you're looking into a prompter, whether or not it's reversed or not. If they're looking at themselves, you may want to have it non-reversed so it doesn't. So after it comes out of the mirror, it is reversed, so it looks more like looking at yourself in a mirror, so you're less freaked out with, if they want to point at something over their shoulder, they don't know which hand to use because it's inverted. So bear that in mind, and just see what the talent is most comfortable with. Some people like to see it, like Alex, and want to know when he's on camera and when they're gone to the slide, etc. But if there's any kind of latency, it can really slow you down and make it be very disconcerting to see something lagging behind what's really happening.
Next question.
Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois. Up next, what are your current recommendations for a 2-foot tube light with remote control capabilities?
There's a lot of them. I'd probably start looking at Aperture and Nanlite. Nanlite, all their Pavo tubes all have remote on an iPhone, I believe, and so do Aperture. I think Aperture has some that are tube-like. But I think that the Pavo tubes have really kind of pushed forward there. I do think Aperture's software is a little bit easier to use. So I think that those are the things to kind of consider there. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, another brand I would look at too, which is more on the affordable side, is Neewer, Neewer. A lot of their lights have app control as well, and they do make them in various sizes, 2 feet, 4 feet, etc.
And I would definitely lean towards Neewer if you aren't going to move them very much. I have bought Neewers in the past. If you can put them into a studio and leave them there, they tend to work just fine. If they don't handle wear and tear very well. They are definitely less expensive components, and those components don't handle travel or being set up and broken down very, very many times before they start to come apart. Go ahead, Bill.
Another trend I've seen is once upon a time, all tube lights were mostly fluorescent and they had some definite color characteristics. These days, you're starting to see a lot of tube form factors, but they actually have LEDs inside. So you get the benefit of low current draw and things like that. Some of them have both the high color temperature and low color temperature LEDs in there, so you can mix them and get some version of dial-inable color temperature. So we're seeing a lot of difference between now and the old days when you used to have to get specific kinds of tubes that had specific fluorescent chemistry in them to make them not look ghastly, because early fluorescents looked pretty bad.
And pretty much everything's LED at this point. You may get stuff, if you need high power, you may do something else, but you should, there's a handful of excuses to buy something other than LED, which is you need a lot of light, or you need, and some of us still like to light our green screens with tubes because we can do green on green more easily, but that's about it. Next question.
Matthew LeCount in Oakland, California. When testing an SDI run 200 feet, does a coiled cable count as distance, or should it be stretched out?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It kind of depends on what you mean by coiled cable. You mean a coiled cable like this?
I think it just means if it's still,
or a coiled cable like this.
Yeah, I think it's the second there.
If it's this, then the distance is the same, the length of the cable plus. It doesn't matter if it's stretched out or not. It might make a slight difference if you have a very high magnetic field nearby. It may reduce the signal strength. It may make noise on the digital cable. It doesn't really change its length, whether it's coiled or not. The length of the cable determines its signal loss and its impedance, not necessarily whether it's stretched out or kept straight.
Yeah, I agree. We often would tell new interns that it needed to be stretched out and go around in a circle to test all the cables, and so we'd we watch them do it.
You're evil, Alex Lindsay.
We would tell them, we would tell them that they had to do it in a perfect circle. So we'd say, if it's not a perfect circle, it's not a perfect test. And they would.
That's right before you ask them to go find you a left-handed Phillips screwdriver.
I bet you sold Monster cable in the hi-fi store too, didn't you?
It was only the first time, and then after that, we would all laugh and go out to lunch, and then we tell them you can just leave it up. You just leave them coiled. The next question.
Next question comes from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. Using a transparent window to display prompt text on top of a presentation, is it possible to dim the keynote and or PowerPoint in the background while the prompt text lies on top? If not, any workarounds? Thanks.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. It just depends on what you're trying to get, what software or hardware are you using to do that. So for instance, if I wanted to put transparent text over myself, and I wanted to do that, if I had a dark gray background on an ATEM and a white text, I could simply key it and not key it all the way, and it would just make me darker and make that text lighter. And so, make that text just pop on. So that might be an easy way to do that. It just depends if you have a switcher. But if you have something that's doing the compositing, giving it something with an alpha channel that is like 90% opaque or 80% opaque is going to automatically make something less, make everything else darker in the background. You may not have proc amps that are going to allow you to actually change that in your pipeline, but that's one way to do it relatively quickly. Go ahead, Courtney.
I personally never put teleprompter superimposed over the top of any other image because it makes it harder to read. The prompter text, remember, is moving up, and so you never know if there's going to be a bright object that pops up in the background. It's going to reduce the readability as that prompter text rolls over the top of it. So if you want to have a little image up that shows the people what is let's say a satellite return feed or something so that they can see the person on the other side every now and then, they're really reading the prompter. They should be focused on the text on the prompter, not on something else. You could put it in a little window down at the bottom underneath the scrolling text. So you make the scrolling text a little shorter in height, and you could put a row of images at the bottom. But I wouldn't superimpose a full image behind scrolling text because it just makes it more difficult to read, and people have a tough enough time reading moving text as it is.
Yep. The way we use that a lot of times is not so much for prompter rolling text, but if we want to give announcements or put up questions actually for the person to read, we'll make them semi-transparent, mostly almost completely opaque, but semi-transparent across the top, like a little bar that goes across. Here's a question from Judith, and she and they can then they are seeing it because a lot of times we're using video on the other side, and then they see this come up. But it's definitely, I agree with Courtney, if you're going to move text to like a teleprompter, I would not do that. Next question.
Jerry Walser in Truckee, California. You stated that you aren't going to NAMM. Why not pay a crew to go to NAMM if you want to cover it rather than ask for volunteers? There's always a way to find a budget.
Because we do it to figure it out amongst ourselves. So we're here to figure it out. The main reason we do it is to figure it out. There's a couple shows that we're really covering, and so the real shows that we're pushing hard to cover are NAB and IBC. So just so you know how we view these, NAB and IBC, and we have a lot of volunteers for those as well. The other ones are a lot of times are us trying to figure it out. Like, what do we want to do? And we want to experiment, and how do we make this work? And so NAMM was another one of those experiments. I had a goal to experiment with some spatial video and also just some ideas around iPhone production. But without anybody else on the ground, and also with some pressures that I had in production, I chose not to do that. But it's not really a thing that we're doing, other than we're experimenting and trying to figure out better ways to do it. So hiring somebody else to do it and just go do it wouldn't solve any problem for us, because it doesn't really help us figure it out. Because we're trying to experiment with all new platforms. You saw what Guy did at CES. And what even the accessibility group did, as far as covering an accessibility conference. So there are a lot of different ways that we're playing with that, but it's all about us playing together. And it's also, for me, it's all about meeting other people. When I say, I want to go do one of these, like NAB, we're going to roll out a call to action this week. It's for me to hang out with everybody. And I just find that hanging out doing production is the best way to hang out. So anyway, we'll be, that's why we're doing that. Next question.
Jeremy Holm, Horn, Pier 27, San Francisco, California. Can anyone suggest a solution to rip and parse music from an old iPod? Thanks.
I don't. So the question for you is, how old? Is it actually still a spinning drive, or is it an iPod that's there? I think you're going to need to find an old computer that's going to be able to run the old iTunes. They're going to connect to the old iPod and be able to do it. This computer right here might be able to do that. The OS has not been changed in a very long time. It has a very specific skill set. Is that it can do 24p. And so it has a very specific skill set, and I don't think we've ever updated it. So anyway, maybe. Go ahead, Alex.
You might want to try iMazing, because that is a good way to get data off those devices. And I'm not 100% certain if it'll work. It should. And I know a lot of people use that for various older iPods as well.
Next question.
Ash in Marlborough, New Jersey says, what does the panel think about Google Lumiere, its new AI video generator?
Yeah, we're really interested in it. It looks good. I mean, it's still in early days. So Google is now has I don't have a sample of it here, but it's allowing you to give it prompts, and it's going to give you back video. And so Courtney popped some of them up. So there's some prompts that were generated from video, which is kind of fun. And so I think for memes and fun ideas, it's a whole new possibilities of memes. So I think that there's a lot of fun there to be had, but I think we're probably going to have to wait before we do anything with those. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just really interested in what our guest, Michael Cioni, had to say about his breaking it into utility AI and generative AI and where those things fit in, and his ideas that utility AI is going to really have more short-term and medium-term effect than generative AI. And I came away from that thinking, I suspect he might be right about that. AI's ability to make a difference in a person's life in terms of efficiency and using it in limited circumstance, I think is probably a lot more powerful, will be a lot more powerful in the next 5 years than the true generative making up kind of visuals and footage and things like that. I might turn out to be wrong, but that's how I've been thinking about it lately.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I've looked at this. I'm not sure how long it can sustain a moving shot, because all the samples I see really only last about a second or 2 seconds. And I think it's going to run into problems with continuity. Even with when you see the elephant walking, sometimes its back foot you'll see split into 2 legs or something. So there's some inconsistency with generative AI that generates realistic looking images that are moving realistically. It hasn't quite gotten it all down correctly. And I think what they're doing is they're separating a lot of the background and the foreground into different objects and then combining them together at the last minute because the relationship to the foreground and the background doesn't necessarily track with the randomness that is introduced into AI image generation. But I got to say, it's come quite a long way from the first attempt at generating moving video. It has come quite a long way.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Starling Plaza, Texas. Arc Search combines a browser, a search engine, and an AI chatbot that builds a website for you. Is this the future of interacting and web creation? And he's got a link there.
Good, Alex.
First of all, Paul, I love that you have so much confidence in the panel that we can with certainty predict the future of how this technology is going to play out. I think the app looks really cool. Whether or not is going to be the future of interacting and web creation, I mean, who's to say? I think what's going to happen, and I will lump the terms AI, large language models, machine learning in one pool. And I will say that over the next 5 years, I think what's going to happen is we're certainly going to see a lot of creativity and interesting implementations of this technology. And I think a lot of the technology and implementations that we thought would be the new way that we would how we would interact with these systems may actually just end up falling by the wayside, and a lot of stuff that we didn't think would actually work may actually end up being the technology that we actually end up using. So it's going to be really interesting over the next few years how this stuff is going to play out.
Now, last question.
Last question comes from David Brady in New York City, and David says, besides Unity Connect, are there any other useful push-to-talk solutions for small event teams where only one PL is needed, but having push-to-talk functionality is a benefit?
Yeah, I want to outline, there's Unity Comms and there's Unity Connect. Unity Connect is moving lots of channels of audio from one place to the other. Unity Comms is what you're talking about, PTT. I don't know of a lot of other good software versions of that at that same price point. Of course, there's ClearComm and lots of other comms that are available there. But you probably Unity Connect, of course, we use those to backhaul between possibly two Unity sets of Unity comms or pass music. So those are some of the things that you want to kind of consider as you go down that path. We're really excited to have Glen Phillips up here in just a couple minutes. And just a quick overview of the rest of the week. Today, on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about Captain Disillusion graphics breakdown. He's got a great video out, and we're going to kind of break down what he did and talk about what we think worked and didn't work about his video. It's pretty exciting. He's doing... I know coverage of frame rate. I know it's very little geeky. And Wednesday, Ryan Summers, motion graphic artist, will be here talking about his journey. So he'll be talking about motion graphics in today's computer world and talking about his experience in the industry. Thursday, we'll be talking about color basics. CJ Covell is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about how to get better color out of your cameras. Friday, we're still working on. And Saturday and Sunday, of course, are open to Q&A. Saturday is a little bit of an experimental, so you'll see us training and figuring new things out. And Sunday, of course, is introspection. We don't stream that, so if you don't know what that is, it's because we don't put it on YouTube. And we mostly talk amongst ourselves, try to figure out what we like and don't like about what we're doing every single week. I'm honored to welcome Glen Phillips to the show. Glen grew up in Santa Barbara, where he formed the band Toad the Wet Sprocket in 1985 with friends in high school at only 15 years old. Their first album, Bread and Circus, was released in 1988, and they went on to release 6 albums before taking a break and then releasing another 2 in the last decade. In 2001, Glen embarked on his solo effort with Abalum and has over 10 additional releases. Glen tours with both Toad the Wet Sprocket and as a solo artist. Glen has also been part of a few other bands, including Flapping Flapping, Mutual Admiration Society, Plover, Remote Tree Children, and Works Progress Administration. Glen, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Now, you started the band when you were 15 years old, and you ended up with a band that was going platinum. How did that happen? Like, what did it take to put that together? Was it by accident? Was it something that you're really focused on?
It was mostly by accident. I mean, I how can I say this? I had really early on realized I wanted to be in the arts, but did not want to have the kind of personal exposure of being a public artist. I'd had a theater teacher in high school who was, explaining that he was teaching because he just realized he didn't want to spend the rest of his life auditioning and having the humiliation of that and, being judged and criticized all the time. So he taught, and I was like, I'm going to be a high school teacher. And the band met in high school theater. We were in Oklahoma and our town together. Our bass player sang "The Farmer and the Cowman Should Be Friends," and so we were, we had that background. But then we made a record kind of by accident. A friend of ours needed a backup band on 2 songs, and for payment, we got to record 2 of our own, and we just did them. It was like live in a house in Thousand Oaks, and then we were like, that was fun. We should do 8 more songs. Then we'd have a tape we could sell at town. So we spent $600 and recorded 8 more songs, and that was our first record, Bread and Circus. And then that seemed easy, so we did another one. But I mean, that was when I was like 16, 17.
It's incredible.
And then when
and
we
I
were
find
8,
did you find that it was just fortunate that you found a group of people that you could work with? My daughter is actually the age that you were when you started the band, and she's in like 4 bands and plays, drums in one and bass in another. But you feel like there's a mix there that is hard. Like some of the bands are, they've got a great lead singer, but no one else can play, or they can play and the lead singer can't hold a tune. And there's all these things in high school. How do you think that kind of found its way to Toad the Wet Sprocket?
I mean, luck. There was a little bit of switching around the original. It started with Todd and I. And probably the reason, a guitarist, and, I was listening to a ton of metal as a freshman. That was more my speed. And he had this nice station wagon that I could throw my bike in, and he only lived 2 blocks away from me. We had the same house, but like a mirrored floor plan, Thunderbird 2 development. And I would get rides home from him because I was lazy, and he had a really great record collection and turned me on to Husker Du and R.E.M. and the Replacements. And And so he kind of changed the music I was listening to, and we started writing songs together. And so we lucked out in finding people who could play and who had enough similarity in the music that we liked and wanted to emulate, that, you know, that worked.
Now, did
And
you?
then it was very much luck. Like,
Yeah. I mean, did the I think they say the Beatles did 1,000 shows where they're mostly covering other people's music before they started writing their own music. Did you do a lot of that in high school? Did you cover a lot of songs?
no, we played a handful of parties where we played covers, but the one place that was closest to us was called Pat's Grass Shack. And it was this guy named Larry. And Larry didn't like ASCAP, didn't like BMI. And so he wouldn't pay. And so it was original music only, but like not because he loved local art. It was just because he was a cheap bastard. And so so we had to have full sets of original material right away. And we were playing there like every week. And you didn't have to have a crowd, really. You just had to be there. He wanted music and he couldn't put on the radio, so he had local bands. So,
Which is funny because even paying anything to local bands is probably more than ASCAP.
he didn't pay us. I mean, we played for tips. Like,
It was just there, yeah.
Yeah, or it was $2 at the door or something. But
Yeah.
you know, it was just a place that we could play, and so we learned how to be a band by being there and just having to write new songs every week, because we'd feel like we were jerks if we weren't playing new songs every week. So,
And there's something about that drive, right? Of having a deadline.
yeah, it was great. We wrote a ton, and once again, we came up with these 2 records worth of material. And when we were recording Pale, the second record, we were recording with this guy, Marvin Etzioni, whose manager worked at ASCAP. He handed it to this young guy, Nick Terzo, and Nick started doing cassette dubs out of his office and sending it to A&R people. So we got a call. I think it was Vicky. Oh, God, what was her name? She was at Geffen, was the first one. And we started getting calls from A&R people, but we'd never sent out a demo. We didn't know that there would be any incoming calls. So once again, it was pretty accidental. I mean, we worked hard once we got signed, but and we worked hard before. We always wanted to make good music, but we certainly didn't have the ambition to like be the biggest band in the world.
How did you choose? You have Geffen, you have Columbia, you have others, and you ended up choosing Columbia. But what caused you to make that choice over the other record companies?
Complete creative control. So it was the lowest. I think MCA offered $1 million or something, and we did licensing. We wanted the first 2 albums licensed. We licensed Bread and Circus. I think it was 50,000 and 75 were the fees we got for those. I mean, it's a lot, but it wasn't insane. And we got creative control, which is the thing we really wanted. So
I look back, MCA, they were picking up a bunch of bands at that time. They picked up, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and they picked up a band called the Affordable Floors, and and then it just buried it. Like they went through it could have been, I mean, that's how quickly it could happen there.
The labels had a ton of money right then, because they were selling CD and cassette and LP for every artist that people cared about. So they were selling on 3 physical formats. Radio was doing great. They had an insane amount of cash to spend. And it was the beginning of, this alternative college music, post-punk thing turning into pop music. And, we had, I would say we were much more aligned in our minds with bands like Replacements and Husker Du than we were with pop music. And, even when we recorded the Fear album, with All I Want, we almost didn't put it on the record because it was too pop. It was the era of bands on major labels wanting their credibility and acting like they were still on indie records, and then kind of shitting all over their singles when they got popular. Bands not wanting to play like Pearl Jam, right? And not wanting to play Alive or, what were the Counting Crows, there was this idea that even though you were on a major, you still wanted to somehow be a secret band that nobody knew about. And,
yeah, it was definitely. I mean, when I was at Sony, because I actually promoted Toad the Wet Sprocket back in the in the early days, and but Pearl Jam was just coming out when I had moved from Sony to being a music director in a radio station, but Sony Pearl Jam came out, and we were like, this is going to be huge. Like this is not an alternative rock band. This is this is a stadium band, and they're like, yeah, but they have to do alternative rock first. Like
Yes.
they have to kind of work their way through that process, right?
It was a strange era, and that having a single, and we were on the softer side of what was there. Having a single, like it was our third album, and we'd been touring at colleges and going to college radio constantly, and that was our background. And we were, found ourselves very quickly being like the punchline to a lot of jokes, which was really, it was difficult.
And was that because just because of the name?
A bit of the name, but also radio band, and we were on Sony. Sony wasn't cool. We weren't cool. Right. And I don't think we understood that you needed to control your own narrative, or it would be written for you.
Right.
So, you live, you learn.
Yeah. Now when you recorded Fear, I mean, definitely the sound changed a lot. Is that because you were now recording in a different studio?
Well, the first two albums were recorded live, right? Lead vocal included. We did, I think it was 48 hours total to record and mix the Bread and Circus record. And we spent a little more time on Pale, but, it was minimal.
You recorded they talk about bands sitting in the studio for, months trying to get something out. Now these were all stuff you've been playing a lot at the bar?
Yeah, we've been playing it at the bar. And I mean, if you listen to the albums, they're not, I mean, our early fans, I think what they liked was this unadorned, it's like even the lyrics are so embarrassing. And I was singing halfway in an English accent and kind of mumbling, swallowing my words. And, because I was used to singing in my parents' bedroom. And so there's something about it.
I think there's something very raw about it. I think there's a power.
Yeah,
to
it's
that.
raw and it's real. That's why people like it. I can't listen to those albums because it's like me naked as a teenager, and it's like I'm embarrassed of it. But I understand why it's appealing because it was really authentic. It was really, even all the mistakes are, they were very real records. But at the same time,
authenticity goes a long way,
Yeah, it does. And when we came to the Fear record, I mean, I was a huge, I think we talked to huge, we called him Huge Badger, Hugh Padgham, and, met with a bunch of our favorite producers. I was also really I loved, Talk, Tears for Fears, Peter Gabriel. I loved those like big, lush, like 80s records that were really trying to push the edges. And so we ended up finding Gavin McKillop, and, we figured most bands get dropped. And so we would get like one chance to make a record in a big studio. It was 48 tracks. It was this giant SSL, mixed it on a Neve. And, we thought our one chance to make a big, ambitious record. And so we were doing that and, not thinking so much big singles. But, for me, it was more like the English bands that I really loved who were trying to do really intricate production. And it was our teenage version of that.
What were you happy with it?
I mean, yes, I have mixed feelings about that record. I feel like as a writer, I hadn't really found, as a lyricist, I hadn't really found my center yet. It's a combination of pretension and vagueness and overreach that it can be a little embarrassing. I feel like Dulcinea was probably our best band record because we've been touring like crazy. We really wanted to make a record that that reflected how we sounded as a live band because I think we had a ton of confidence. It's the most the first time, like, we went in and we're like, we're good at what we do. Let's make an awesome record. Went in with Gavin McKillop again, same producer. And he's, he grew up, I think it was Air Studios. And, he grew up in the old way where he started as a T-boy and then he got to do spotter racing of Kate Bush's breaths, after they'd go for tea and he would sit there and have to do like the edits. And so, and he'd worked with bands like The Church and The Chills and Shriekback. And he produced, I think his first production gig was General Public. So it was great going in with him. He was like old school English engineer. And as a producer, the kind of guy who instead of telling you how to change anything, he would just say, third verse really sounds like you're phoning it in. Can you make it better?
Yeah.
It's like, I get bored here.
I think those are some of the best. I think Rick Rubin, it sounds like when you see him, see some of the outtakes, it's more like trying to pull, not tell the artist what to do, but pull what they're doing out.
Yeah. Well, and there's a thing about saying like, yeah, I get bored here. It sounds like you're just rehashing something. It's not taking me anywhere.
Yeah.
That lets the artist come up with the. I would rather that than a guy who's going to tell you how you should have written the song. But I love it when somebody goes, "This isn't good enough," and then your job is to do better. So Gavin was great that way. But Dulcinea, we made a point of making it like no sound that we couldn't, limited the harmonies to, we weren't stacking anything, limited the overdubs to what we could do. We had a guy playing keyboards live with us. So we made sure it was like just raw and big. And, I like records with less on them, but I have a tendency to add a lot more. I go more as more by instinct. But there's something about like, PJ Harvey records where it's like a drum, not even a drum set, a bass and her voice, and they sound bigger than anything. So,
absolutely. Can we persuade you to play something for us from Toad?
Sure. I just happen to have this fiddle. Let me change my gain. I've been warned. All right. Nothing so loud as hearing when we lie. Truth is not kind. You said neither am I. The air outside so soft, saying everything. All I want is to feel this way, be this close, feel the same. All I want is to feel this way. Evening speaks, feel it say.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. And you're pretty well set up there. You played a lot during COVID, right? Over online?
Yeah, I did. I was doing, what was it, 3 live casts on social media a week, and plus a Stage It show. Plus I do kind of community choir leading. And so I would do that on Zoom, loop myself and sing, and people would sing along. So it was 5 nights a week working for about 18 months or something online.
What was that like?
It gave me something to do. It's the most I've ever played and had to learn new songs. Like just because I was doing, 4 hours of, just me and an acoustic guitar. There was a good, technical, certainly a lot to learn quickly in terms of how to make the broadcasts better and how the different services would screw up my audio. Became friends with OBS early. And so, yeah, working that out and then just like messing around with all my having to learn a ton of songs. So, a lot of looking at this screen. A friend gave me this camera that I'm using. It's one of the Sony 6500, the little mirrorless. It's lovely. Good glass. Good glass.
It's all about the glass.
But there was just a lot of quick learning and having to, put in new songs in the set every week. So lots of lyrics on the screen in front of me as I'm like just trying to keep up and figure stuff out and take requests. And it was beautiful. I was able to do the social media things. When I started, I didn't know how long it would last. And so was setting them up. They were all benefits. I found like the benefit button on Facebook, and so did that. And so every single one of those live casts was a benefit. So people could tip directly on Facebook, and that would go to whatever nonprofit. And at some point, somebody was like, "Are you okay? Do you need any?" So I just put up a little PayPal thing at the bottom, and people would tip if they wanted. But it felt really good not to have a paywall or not to have a price.
Right.
And playing live ended up actually getting me through lockdown, which was amazing.
Right.
And created this community that's like really carried on in, sense. So these people, will fly out, see each other at shows. A lot of, some, if they're having health problems, like they have their own kind of network. They call themselves the Squirrels, because, or at least some of them do. The squirrel thing came out of me reading, because I'm looking at the chat, and some of it, especially in the first few songs, it's like, can everybody hear everything? Is it like, somebody saying I'm clipping? Is somebody saying, it's like, because there's nobody else in the room. So I'm, also trying to figure out. And so I would be, reading the chat in the middle of and then I constantly get squirreled. So,
now you're going to you're going on tour soon, right? In a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm going out East Coast with Sean Mullins.
Yeah. And do you enjoy touring?
Yes, although I'm wondering why I decided to do an East Coast tour in the middle of February.
The thought had crossed my mind.
I love Maine, but it's just going to be, it's the loadouts are going to absolutely destroy. Like, it's that you get into the club before they've warmed it up.
Yeah.
And then when you're done with the show, it's midnight. And, it's the two of us and sharing a car together, and it's going to be the loadout. It's just going to be brutal every night, like just going into the cold car with all the stuff. And
what do you take with you?
Guitar, DI, boxes of shirts, thermals.
But it's pretty low. I mean, you're not, because I know that when you're touring with Toad the Wet Sprocket, of course you have a bus and there's gear.
There's a crew. There's all of that. When I go out on my own, it's usually me, and if I'm lucky, it's my opening act or a friend. Sometimes I have a friend who opens for me and accompanies me. 2 of us in a compact car, and I just got management again it a few months ago. So it's like. It's it's kept me grateful with Toad to have had to be an indie musician doing all the jobs and doing them badly for so long for my solo stuff. And
having somebody else manage that for you smooths it out a little bit.
Oh my God. It's like, but with Toad, it's like, I think it was sweet. My youngest daughter asked me at one point, do you thank the guitar tech every time he hands you a guitar? And I was like, I actually do. I do.
He is amazing. I actually went at your show in Hot Monk. I sat right next to him, so I sat there and watched. I mean, he was just, wow.
He works hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. He works really hard. But it's like I do shows without anybody handing me a tuned guitar, and it's an amazing privilege to get to ever have a crew, get to ever have help, get to, Toad's sound guy. Like, our crew works hard. It's a small crew, and everybody's doing multiple jobs. Like John Edmond, who does our sound, he's a wizard. He's fantastic. And it's small, tight crew. So, and when it's solo, it's just, I got to settle the show, settle the merch, pack it out, load it out. And
how important is merch?
Increasingly, well, because there's no such thing as streaming money or, really residuals anymore. Like, the mailbox money is very, very slowed down. Mm-hmm. Toad gets some of that, but certainly, I think most songwriters say it's down about 50% in the last few years.
Right.
So, the passive income is not really reliable. So, you essentially have to go out and, earn every dollar you make. It's part of why, like, I've, of course, buying new gear to make money, but I've been trying to find my way slowly into more voice work. I picked up this delightful sign. I keep looking at my my brand new 416. I'm so happy about it. Got to do the 416. But it's been, I'm trying to shift because I have this weird esoteric skill set that actually worked very well for me in lockdown because I'd already been doing online concerts through Stage It for a while. But I need to figure out ways of having an income when I'm at home with like I said, a weird set of skills. And so I know how to modulate my voice. I know how to record things, and I can label a file correctly. So
turns out to be very valuable.
It really is. So hopefully, voice work will enable me to, stay home and stay in Santa Barbara, which is increasingly difficult.
Yeah. Now, you re-recorded a bunch of your music, right? About 15 years ago, to take control of it again?
Yeah, that was kind of the first step of Toad getting back together. We played, actually, the first step was that Adam from Counting Crows wanted us to open for Counting Crows, and was like, would you get back together to open for us? And we did. But the re-records, was at a time, and we just re-released it because we did those pre-streaming. So we spruced it up a little and put it out again. But yeah, we did the re-records a while ago because we owned our publishing, and hoping to give people the option to have an easier one-stop shop for sync, which has worked once or twice. But
what was it like to go back to those songs? And I guess you've been playing them live, but to go back and re-record them, was it hard to get back into that mode?
Yes or no? For me, it's just hard to sing that high. The band really liked the way my voice sounded at the absolute top of my shouting range. So after the Fear tour, I had a giant polyp on my vocal cords. I was just screaming through every night, and we never broke. Never took a break, so I had to get a polyp sliced out of my throat. We did 300 shows for that record.
Yeah.
Because we'd been out for 9 months, and then All I Want was a hit. And so, 300 shows for one record, it was a lot.
Absolutely.
We worked our asses off. So why did I say that? So the high notes, part of getting back together as the band was I took everything down a step. And so just for survival. So yeah, singing that high was the hardest part for me, and not sounding like I was straining the entire time. But as far as the instruments and everything, like it was shockingly easy. Like, you just
I noticed that the instruments have a bigger in the re-records, like you can hear a lot more of the guitar. And those types of things where it is, the instruments come forward a little bit more than they did in the original. I think it was. I'm not sure if that was on purpose or not. But
no, I mean, we were,
mics.
especially with the Fear album. Fear had that very soft reverby, just coming out of the 80s, early 90s sound. And Dulcinea was much drier, much more upfront. We didn't want to hyper compress it. Like, I remember Gavin at the time was annoyed at how compressed all the remixes were, the radio remix. Just everything was so smashed. We were lucky enough to have like a Michael Brower remix of All I Want, and we were like just complaining our way through it. The label hated us, like, because we couldn't stop bitching about how compressed everything was.
But it
it's a
worked.
great remix. Brower's a genius.
Yeah.
So when we got back, we were updating. We weren't like going to change like the basic. We could play. We had the same guitars and the same signal paths.
Right.
We recorded most of it at home studios. I forget where we did the drums. Did it at a local studio. Did it quick, and then, did a lot of the recording at home. Todd mixed a little over half of it. I mixed the rest. We just kind of threw it together.
And we're a bunch of tech guys. I'm going to have to ask you what you mix on. What are you using to mix your albums or your music?
I use Logic at this point just because I don't have to keep paying for it.
Right.
It's got its issues, but it also is perfectly usable. It's an amazing program. I mean, I would say for $200, there is nothing under the sun that offers more capacity or capability. I used to be on Digital Performer because my brother, he was like Bruno Martinelli from Fame when he was a kid. He like had a Jupiter and a Juno 6 and like was doing sequencing on a Mac SE and with early he was Performer before it was Digital Performer, and he's been a product manager at Korg for almost 30 years. He's been at Korg. So he was on Digital Performer, so I was on Digital Performer and used that for a long time. And then did a couple projects where I got into Logic. I don't know. Logic, I want to say Logic 8, maybe Logic 9. I think it was Logic 9. And I've just always come back to it. It works really well. And, whatever you're fastest on, I think is the best tool.
Yeah, absolutely. The band took a break in 1998, and then you released your first album in 2001. What was the space between those like?
Pretty terrible. I mean, I was really, really depressed. I couldn't get a record deal, and if you're bitter, there's no better way not to get a record deal than walking around bitter and entitled. And I was bitter and entitled, and had, 2 kids to support, and was unemployed at 27. Couldn't get somebody, certainly wasn't going to get signed again at any Sony label. Donnie Einer, was not a fan of me. It made it very clear. And I was also at some point told that word had gone to Warner that they were not to sign me either. Somebody tried to sign me there and couldn't do it. And I was embittered and entitled. And I went into like a massive depression, kind of years long, typical story. And went out solo, but was in such a terrible... I should have been like in a home for a bit, and instead I went on tour and drove away most of the audience. And I remember getting letters just saying like, you obviously don't want to be here. Why are you wasting my time and my money?
Wow.
And so I had a lot of learning and growing up and humbling that I needed. And, Largo, I feel like I owe my life to Largo and Nickel Creek, to Flanagan for taking me in there. And, I would play almost at least every month, but I feel like I would open for other people and would go down just to watch, Amy Mann and like Rhett Miller and Glen Phillips and Elliott Smith and John Bryan and just the amazing people there who'd all had, in some ways, most of us had been dropped and didn't know what was going on, and that community really, really helped me. And then I met Nickel Creek just randomly. It was before their first record came out, and Sean Watkins was working on a solo record, and he'd written a song. He was a big Toad fan, I guess, and he had a Toad sticker. Met a friend of mine, John Mui, who's a guitar tech, and basically reached out to ask me to sing this song. And I met them, and we ended up doing, 2 side projects together, and I went out on the road with them, and they were, when Toad had finished, it was like we had a crew bus and a band bus, and we didn't talk to each other, and it was just like everything was so I don't know. We were all in our own little pit of resentment, and
Right.
Resentment breeds resentment. It was just this kind of storm of that. And then there were these kids who were the best musicians I had ever met in my life, who were omnivorous, who were, and once again, very innocent. Like, they hadn't sworn, they hadn't they hadn't had their first sip of coffee. Like, I got to do things with them where it was like shooting fish in a barrel to corrupt them. And so low bar for corruption. But I was so inspired. And we go on tour, and they just want to play more music. You finish a show, and it's like we would stand outside the club, and we would play for another hour. And you get into a new town, and it's like, found a local coffee shop. There's a museum. Like, they were alive. And instead of everybody wandering off, I had forgotten how good life could be and how much fun and how beautiful it could be to play music. And honestly, I feel like they saved my life. So they gave me hope again. And, and once again, between that and Largo, Largo was how I met Ethan Johns, who ended up recording my first solo record. I couldn't get a deal, but it was amazing having Flanny, having Ethan be like, these songs are great. Let's do it. Fuck the labels. Let's do it on our own.
Yeah.
And so good people, good musicians. That's what kind of got me out of it. But I was a wreck during those years.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to get too much sympathy for having been a rock star, and I'm aware of that. It's a trope.
But it's just hard. You have your personality. I had a company that I closed after 20 years or whatever. You have your whole personality in that thing, and it's trying to find your context again, I think is
it's your identity. And I will say I would go back to I go back to this memory when I was 16 and wanted to be a school teacher, where I knew I didn't have this thick skin for it. I didn't have the ego. I don't want to be on top. It's part of why the idea of voiceover and voice acting are so appealing. Is I love writing songs. I love making music. I love performing. I don't like being picked apart. And I don't need to be the guy in front. I don't give a damn about my legacy. I don't think humanity is going to last more than 300 years if we're lucky. I just want to love the people I love and be loved by them and have time to be with them. And, I'm not Bob Dylan. It's not, which is fine. I just love making music. And it's funny, I teach songwriting to people, and so many people, it's like, well, there's why do you write songs? What are you after? And luckily there are a lot of people who are driven by just the joy of creation, and they want to be able to create more and to put more into it. But, you know, as soon as you put ambition, it's like, well, I want to get a cut by like an artist. I want it to be there. It's like, it's not you can't jump from zero to getting a cut, you know? And if that's your aim, kind of good luck. Like, there's something about the purity of just getting to create. And the difficulty in being a professional musician is you have this public appearance to maintain. And especially now, it's like I don't have the heart for it. I don't have the desire to be seen. I don't want to live online. I was happy to give something personal during lockdown, but I don't want to post on social media. I want to exist in real time with real people and want to make art that I care about. And not, you know, good art comes from play, comes from having nothing left, you know, nothing to lose. And, you know, and not to say play can't be really hard. You can't build up a good sweat and like have to work as hard as you've ever worked. Like that's the best play, right? But, for me, that thing is, you know, rather than trying to get like, oh, if I just get one step up, then I'll be able to have a tour manager. And if I get two steps up, I'll be able to have a band. And then I was like, always the next thing, and nothing's ever enough. And just to be able to figure out what enough is and be loving and give back, like that really is as ambitious as I want to be right now. I want to make great art, but it's hard to make great art if like it's trying to get me somewhere. The art has to be trying to get itself somewhere. The art has to be something that needs to move through me, that like not a device for a career, because there are a lot of people who can make that, who do believe in that, who are super talented, who know how to write a hit, who want to be at the top, who need to be a star, and they're, you know, like, I don't take anything away from the people who have that ambition, but I knew when I was a kid I didn't. I just wanted to be around it and have enough. And so I'm trying to like deprogram from having been successful as a young person to
It's hard.
figuring out what enough is as an adult.
Can you play us one of your solo tunes?
Yeah, why not? What do I do? Oh wait, gotta do the all these screaming. There we go. So this is what it's like now, without the constant leaving, to sit and sense the seasons, to be him and he be. The sound of drinking water, turning of the leaves, the movement of the moon, the spaces in between, the long year, the slow days. There is so much here that I had never seen. Your head upon my shoulder, slipping into sleep, to drift within my thoughts, listen to you breathe. Coffee in the bedroom, swaying of the pie, freedom measuring of time. The long year, the slow days. There is so much here that I had never seen. The long year, the slow days. There is so much here that I never seen. There is so much here that I never seen.
So great. So great.
you.
Yeah. And I think we've got a couple questions from both folks here, and then we've got a bunch of questions stacking up from our online audience.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about the recording process. So obviously by the time the third Toad the Wet Sprocket album was rolling around, you guys went from doing a lot of stuff rough around the edges, and then you walk into Granny's house recording studio. You're in a professional environment, a lot of expensive gear. I imagine that must have been a little bit more intimidating. So I'm just curious how the band acclimated to being in a professional recording environment, and also what was the relationship between the band and the producer? Did you find that there was a little bit more pushback? You had a producer that was pushing you to do more takes to try to, I'm not feeling it in this take, let's just do it again. And how did you guys deal with that?
Gavin was great. I mean, we always liked actually taking direction, and his challenges, once again, he was very Socratic. It's like, I'm not into this part. Can you make it more interesting? I get bored here. Make me less bored. And so we got to come up with the answers to everything, which was great. We also had, a budget, right, for the first time. It wasn't like, trying to make it the record as quickly as humanly possible. Which is, why we did everything live. So this idea of, it was a residential studio. The rest of the band was 21 at the time, so they would all go off. It was in Reno, so they would go off to the casinos, and I would hang out back at I'd spend all my time there. But we had time. And so we could experiment and try stuff, and we'd demoed all of these. We had one of those Akai 12 tracks back at the one with the integrated board and the VHS tape kind of thing, or I guess it was a beta cassette. And so we'd done a decent amount of prep going in. There was a lot of pre-production with Gavin. We weren't walking in not knowing what we would do, although there was still a lot of room for figuring stuff out. But he was a great producer. I think he could play piano. I think he had some musical background. He was, once again, more of a, he was an excellent engineer. And he would challenge us, but it didn't cause friction ever. There was never a screw you. And even there were a couple lines. There was one line that referenced food, talked about sandwiches, and he's like, I just hate food. It's me. I know it's me. If you can rewrite it, it'd make me really happy. But I don't think food ever belongs in a song. And if I said no, you're wrong, it works, he'd go, okay, fine. It's my problem. But he would push, but he was also really great at just drawing us out. And it's that kind of criticism that, and I've heard of other producers who don't do this, right? Where they kind of drag people down a little, or it's they think if they brutalize you or make you cry, they'll get a better thing out of you. And I always felt supported. It's that thing of oh, you can do better than this. You can totally do better than this. Sounds like you were just giving yourself an easy out. Third verse, same as the first? Come on. At least scramble it and make it go somewhere. Don't come on, you can do better. It's like, okay, I can do better. That was lazy. So, but yeah, for the most part, it was just really fun to make and really fun to have the tools and the time and the tracks and the learning curve. It was really exciting. And we loved working with him so much. We actually got in the relationship with the label soured when they had really wanted us to go with Jerry Harrison for the Coil record. And we were like, we think...
Well, and Jerry Harrison was the guy, right, at the time.
Yes.
At that, he was doing, whether it was Stroke 9 or a lot of the other ones were all Jerry Harrison.
Yeah, the record company's example was that he did live, and the first album was terrible, but the second one's got all these hits on it. And I had the audacity to say yes, and Jerry Harrison produced both of those albums. And the band got better with him, and that's what we're trying to do with Gavin.
And I'll argue that Jerry Harrison, the Mental Jewelry was the best album that Live put out, in my opinion. Yeah. But there's that. Bill.
I agree. But the other thing I would say with that, was we also had for those two records, for Dulcinea and for Fear, we had A&R, and once again, we had a contract that allowed us to make the record we wanted. And so Ron
in a lot of ways,
Overman,
you paid for that. You paid for that creativity by taking less money so that you could do what you wanted to do.
We did. And one of the big mistakes we made with the Coil record was we took a large advance, and then we didn't do what they said. And that soured the relationship. If you're going to take the money, you got to play ball. And we didn't. And so, there's that. Oh, well. But we didn't take big money, and, we had no advance past the recording fund from the label. Right. That was all. And so our attitude was we would earn what we made. And but Ron Oberman, I just remember he came in and he just listened to all the songs. And he's like, that was great. And then, it was radio's thing to worry about what the singles are. And I love how, everybody's like, oh, we knew it was All I Want from the first second. It's like, well, why did it take you 9 months to put it out then? Sure wasted a lot of money on those two or three singles before it.
Within Fear, I think there's so many good tracks on Fear. I will say Fear is one of my favorite albums in the world.
Thank you.
I love Bread and Circus and I love all Dulcinea. I love all of these albums, but the one that is the most solid, I like every single track. And I think that for me as a fan, All I Want is probably the song I listen to the least. As a song, it's a great song, but it's just that whole album is so deep with great songs. It's a lot of competition there.
Thank you. We wrote a lot for it. We worked hard getting that in there. But having that team and having the support, and for the Dulcinea record, Chuck Plotkin was our A&R guy. And once again, at that era, to have an A&R guy who comes in and he listens to all the mixes and he just goes, wow, it's a wild stew. All he wanted to talk, he said his job was to protect us from the radio people.
Right.
And what he really wanted to know is wow, you could take people on so many journeys with this collection of songs. What emotionally, you got to really ask, what ride do you want to take people on? So when you're sequencing this thing, really just, it's a book, man. You got to think about it emotionally. And that was our A&R experience, which doesn't happen to a lot of bands. Yeah. So
absolutely. It was funny because I noticed is working for Sony is that while Sony wasn't seen as cool, they actually gave a lot of the artists a lot of room. There was a lot. They had a lot of college marketing anyway. We had a lot.
Yeah,
of
and Tom Gibson is our product manager. We would never have had the single of All I Want without him pushing for them to keep going on that record and try one more single.
Yeah.
He was such an incredible advocate. And the road people. We would show up every day. There would be a college radio person, a commercial radio person.
I was that guy.
We would go.
I was the college radio guy. That was what I did.
Yeah, they worked us to death. They worked us so hard. Going to radio stations every day, going to doing in stores at the record stores. The support there and the freedom we had were amazing. And I mean, we were incredibly lucky to have been able to put out, 2 records plus put out Fear and have it go nowhere for 6 months or 9 months, until All I Want. And, no hits. We had singles, but incredibly lucky. And once again, amazing people. And Nick Terzo worked with us for a while. He went to Sony after, was co-A&Ring. Like, I feel we had, really lucky.
Absolutely. Bill?
So I was going to ask you about your thoughts about trends in current music, but then you mentioned Nickel Creek and Chris Thiele, and I didn't mention Chris, but my brain shut down and my envy meter went to 35 from 1 to 10. And I just thank you for being here. This has been such a great day to be on the show, and I just appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and once again, Nickel Creek, mind-blowing. Yeah.
We've got a couple questions coming in from all over the world. Let's go ahead with the first question.
Absolutely. First one comes in from Kyle Hammond in Chicago. What is your inspiration for lyrics?
It really changes. Right now, I've been trying to figure out how I can kind of cram the things I think about into songs. Divorce made for an easy record, and pre-divorce made for an easy record, and Lockdown made for an easy record, right? And so right now there's just like, the possibility of living in a dictatorship, which kind of freaks me out a little bit. And like, I'm trying to, it takes me work to kind of digest the subjects that are most interesting to me and biggest in my mind, and then figure out what can actually be talked about in a song. And I'm trying to kind of wean myself a little off of the news, so I can get back to things that are more local and to chew on. I'm not going to write the song that, changes the election or, stops the division between people or fixes the environment. It's like you can. So for me, it's like reorienting myself back to my life right in front of me, which always contains challenges and things to pay attention to. And, as my therapist says, practice makes practice. It's not like you get somewhere and you're done. So it's been versions of mindfulness for me for a couple decades, because I keep needing to remind myself to not go off into despair. I have the kind of mind that goes really easily into that. And the less media I take in, the more I'm present in the world in front of me, and the more I remember to practice and write and do difficult things and find my edge, the better my life is, and that makes good art. So, I think with songwriting, well, there's a lot to that with lyrics. Like how do you write? And I like to think of it as messages from a future, more evolved self to my current self. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Next question.
Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Orlando, Florida is up next. How much of the art lies in the tech versus how much tech is driven by the art?
How much art is driven? I mean, on occasion, if I'm in a rut on the guitar or something, I will find that getting to play with sounds or getting to, opening up a synth or a plug-in or something will kind of just sonically inspire me to go somewhere and play in a different way. Once again, there are a lot of tricks for returning to play. But I've always liked the idea of, I call them portable songs, that my songs, 99.9% of them, you could play on a ukulele and sing, and it would come across. And so I like to have a song that can kind of withstand that minimalized treatment. It's just a personal preference. So I'm not really driven by tech. I'm terribly curious about it. I have a plugin folder that is stupidly full because I don't have enough room for more things, and I can't afford vintage guitars, but if somebody makes a really cool $50 plugin, I'm usually going to buy it. So just to see what they did, right? So I love the tech, but the tech doesn't often drive my creativity. Like of the few things I've thought of doing online, like, should I just do a podcast about all the plugins I own? Like,
It would probably be successful.
People do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You never
Next question.
know.
Next one comes from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. From your experience in an era before social media, AI, and the wide availability of electronic tools, what are young modern artists missing? What obstacles has modern tech overcome?
That one's complicated too. I'm not a digital native. Like it's a language I don't speak. I think part of what modern artists have is not about necessarily the music, but that idea of broadcasting your personality. But I also think that artists, you look at Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, anyone starting with a J, like it is, they were that person. They were that. They didn't wear what everybody else wore. They didn't act like everybody else acted. They were authentically unicorns, right? And so there is a thing now of that willingness to put yourself out all the time and to find. And there are people who've done it in ways like I feel like Billy Strings is a great modern artist who was broken by social media, but broken by social media that's basically always just him playing a song and playing the shit out of it, and then playing a song with somebody he met backstage or at a festival. Like, it's just song after song after song after song. He's super available on social media, but he's not like showing you what he did for breakfast. He's just showing you the actual thing he loves and cares about. And so there's no artifice to it. So I think there's something about just being digital native and not worrying about it. I think what we've lost is just a connection to the now. But maybe that's me saying that the now can't have a digital aspect. I just don't want to live in a digital now. I'm not interested in a digital now. Yeah. It feels shiny to me, but it often feels hollow. But there are also people who can take that kind of cutting edge thing and create, work that is just absolutely astonishing. And so, somebody was describing to me a while ago, like the difference between modern and current, and that, current is somebody who's taking on what's happening right now and just, just smashing it all together and then throwing it back out, kind of regurgitating what they think is happening right now. Whereas modern can have an element of taking what's happening right now, but it's still modern. David Bowie is always going to be modern, right?
Right.
There is something about him, as much as there were current aspects of, space and ray guns and whatever. There's this thing about it that's just, he's modern. He is on the edge of something and you're never going to catch up with him. And Bjork is modern. There is something, she has an embrace of technology and an ability to exist both in the physical world and in the technological world and seamlessly not even move between the two, just accept them as this one world. She's in that space. So I would say it depends on the artist. If you are an artist for whom the digital world is invigorating and fascinating and opens stuff up in you, then the digital world, it's a fantastic thing. All of this is just more grist for the mill. And if you're a little more tied to the dirt, then it's not, but there's room for all of us. That's the thing. There's room for everybody. And, I think of once again, Billy Strings is a guy, he's an analog guy, man. That guy's just playing guitar. Madison Cunningham, she is just a force of nature musically. She would not need electricity to make great music.
Right.
And then once again, there are people who are, James Blake thank God there's electronic instruments, because he's a genius and he has a ton of soul in that world. So I don't know.
Speaking of technology, next question.
Next question comes to us from Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, BC, Canada. And here on the panel, do you have any opinions about artists remixing their back catalog in Dolby Atmos surround? There is a very large industry demand for this now.
Yeah, I like Soupy Phase as much as the next guy. It's I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, right? Like I got really happy when, I got these guys and I had my first experience of going like, oh, wow, it's like parallax. Like you can, you can't get the 3D thing if you don't move your head, but if you move your head, it's like you could all of a sudden tell what's behind you and what's in front of you, right? Because it's like they're panning there, like, that's cool. I don't listen to things that way most of the time. I think it's great for film and TV. What did I see? I just saw The Creator, and there was this amazing mix of a Radiohead song in that. I forget just blew my mind. Like, surround on a great system is absolutely wonderful. And I think the technology of Atmos is amazing because it is so responsive to so many listening scenarios, right? It's kind of miraculous in that way. Atmos is genius. And so I like that. I think if I were a good enough engineer to actually mix for a living and I could spend all day in an Atmos studio, like remixing people's records, I would be a very happy person. Like, it seems like a ton of fun. I put out like my first solo record, ended up getting released by Emergent Records, which ended up being bought, but it was the 5.1 group. It was Gary Lux. And so I think it's a ton of fun. As most, how can I say this? In Toad the Wet Sprocket, I'm at a level where there are budgets. As a solo artist, I haven't made a profit on a record in Lord knows how long. And so as those technical demands get bigger, but the budgets get smaller, it's a difficult situation for artists of a certain level. But yeah, I don't have a deep thing. I enjoy hearing those mixes when I'm in the right place to hear those mixes. And I'm sometimes going going for a run and being like, God, this album why does this sound so weird? And then I have to go, oh, it's the Atmos version, but I'm binaural. And so it's just soupy.
Next question.
There needs to be an anime character called Soupy Phase. I'm telling you. Nathan G. Sammy in Singapore is in next. Did you guys use a click track for the recordings and live performances? And did you personally prefer in-ear monitors or floor monitors?
So we did not use a click track until just a few years ago. There was no click for the first two records where we did everything live on the floor. Those were, I think we used a click for most of Dulcinea and Fear, but it would really depend on the song. Some songs, like Reincarnation Song, was definitely free-form, live vocal, 2 a.m. It was a take, So kind of depended on that. In the last few years, we've been using a click live, and it's just, there's a certain, for me, going back and forth with Toad as an entity is a little more OCD and is about like trying to get it right? And when I play live, it's, me and an acoustic guitar, and I don't even have a set list. I write down 40 songs on a piece of paper and I see what happens. And so I get my being on the edge and not having a safety net, and then I get doing it with Toad, and we're trying to just make something that's really consistent and sounds good and still has spirit and still feels right. So I think click tracks are great, but it really also depends on the band and the confidence level and even the song. And Toad always had a tendency to get slower. And so it's nice when we don't.
Well, and the I hadn't seen you for a couple of years until you're up here in Novato, and amazing show. Like just really, it's a really tight show. So
Thank you. Yeah, we've been sounding good, and
Really good.
we had a little personnel change maybe 5 years ago, and different drummer now, and it's been really cool. Both to have a new take on the music. We miss Randy a lot, and at the same time, it's changed even the interpersonal dynamics. Just to have one difference in the interpersonal dynamics has allowed a lot of other things to change too between the other relationships. So
now you do one cover that I warned you I was going to ask you to do because I just love it, which is you cover Peter Gabriel's "Mercy." How did that come about? Is just one of the covers that you were doing during COVID, or was it something specific?
Yeah, it was one of the ones I picked up in COVID. I love that record. I love those songs.
Yeah.
So,
could you play it for us?
Could I play it for you? Yes, I can.
Okay, thanks.
Getting my gain back down. Just a second. Looking down on empty streets, all she can see are the dreams all made solid, dreams all made real. And all of the buildings and all of the cars, they were once just a dream in somebody's head. She pictures the broken glass and pictures the steam, pictures a soul with no leaks at the sea. Take the boat out, wait until darkness. Let's take the boat out, wait until darkness comes. Nowhere in the corridors, pale green and gray. Nowhere in the suburbs, cold light of day. There in the midst of it, so alive and alone. Oh, the words support like bone, dreaming of Mercy Street, where your insides out, looking for mercy. Your daddy's arms again, pulling on the papers of the doors that slide smooth, tugging at the darkness, word upon word, confessing all the secrets in the warm velvet box to the priest. Well, he's the doctor, he can handle the shocks. Dreaming of the tenderness, the tremble in the hips, of kissing Mary's lips, dreaming of Mercy Street, where your insides out, looking for mercy. Your daddy's arms again, looking for Mercy Street. I swear they moved that sign, looking for mercy. In your daddy's arms again. And with her father is out in the boat, riding the water, riding the waves to the sea.
Amazing. Stunning.
Yeah. It's really
Great
good.
song.
Thank you so
Makes
much
it
for
easy.
spending so much time with us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Such a great conversation. And you're back on, we can go to your website, to just glenphillips.com, right? To see when the tour dates are.
Yeah. GlenPhillips.com. I'm going to be out with Sean Mullins on the East Coast starting February 14th. 10 shows there. Then I have a few Pacific Northwest shows the first week of March. And then Hot Monk Novato. I forget when that is.
April. It's in April. Sometime mid-April.
But it's sold out, so it doesn't matter. He likes the early sellout.
That one's a crazy one, yeah.
Yeah, and then Toad's going to be out in the summer with Gin Blossoms and Vertical Horizon, and then,
oh my gosh,
in the fall opening for Bare Naked Ladies. So
it's going to be that's a great ticket.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one.
That's going to be awesome. Thank you again. It's really good.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks to the panelists here who, of course, made the first hour work go well and the second hour. Thanks to all the producers here. Sorry we didn't get to as many questions as we thought we would. It was just I suddenly realized we had a lot of questions stacking up.
I'm sorry.
What happened was I had a lot of questions up and I was going through them and I was so into it. And then I looked over and I was like, oh, there's a lot of questions. so we might have to try to drag you back on again if you're willing to.
I'll give shorter answers. I'd love to come back.
Don't give shorter answers. Just come back more often. And thanks to the incredible crew on the back end that makes this all happen. This is a small village that lights up 7 days a week to make sure that this happens, that preps our guests and plans the process and develops the code that makes the actual show work and actually cuts the show. We really appreciate all of your contribution. We couldn't do it without you. And we traveled. If we had walked around and had all these questions and did all these questions person to person, we would have traveled 52,000 miles in the Tlaloc Traversal. That would have been 84,000 kilometers and 413 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. So great to have you on, Glenn.
Oh, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you. That was an outstanding show. Just an outstanding show.
I didn't really. I got probably 2 hours of sleep. It was one of those worried about things, and then I worried about not being rested.
I had the same thing. I was worried about it too. So we were probably in the same group.
I know. I'm scared. Well, for this, and then Wednesday is my first. I'm on a loop group for the first time.
What's a loop group?
Loop group it's like crowd noises and unscripted dialogue for a cartoon.
Nice.
And so the people who do that are great at it. Effort noises for fights, all the kind of anything that's not primary dialogue. And I am being